Welcome back to The Deep Dive. We're the show that really tries to give you the essential knowledge, the surprising truths that are often hidden just beneath the surface of some of the world's biggest stories.
That's right. Digging deeper.
Exactly. And today, well, we're embarking on what might be one of our most challenging missions yet. We're going to try and peel back the layers of a corporation that honestly, for generations, has just been synonymous with trust, with purity.
The American ideal, really.
Yeah, the American ideal itself. We are talking about Johnson & Johnson.
J&J.
But look, before we jump in, before we unpack this mountain of evidence we've pulled together, just a quick but honestly really crucial call to action for you listening. If you value the kind of, extensive research and deep analysis we try to bring you here, please hit that like button. Drop a comment below. Maybe tell us which case study, the baby powder, Risperdal, the hip implants, which one shocked you the most?
Yeah, we'd be interested to hear that.
Definitely. And most importantly, subscribe. Seriously, that small action, it just makes sure this deep dive keeps reaching curious minds like yours.
It really helps.
Okay. So let's turn our attention now to J&J. CNBC's Tyler Matheson once called it a quintessentially American company, said it touches 1 billion people daily.
1 billion, that's huge.
It's staggering. He said it's mother, medicine, and money all rolled into one. And, the company itself, it proudly positions itself as a paragon of ethics.
That's their branding, absolutely,
Yeah.
the credo.
Right, the credo. But you see, our deep dive, and we've looked at court filings, internal corporate memos, trial transcripts, stuff spanning the last half century.
A huge amount of material.
It reveals this, profound disconnect. This pristine, almost, apple pie image of J&J seems completely at odds with what looks like an alleged systematic pattern of deception. We're talking illegal marketing, massive financial penalties.
And their role in national crises, big ones.
Exactly, like the opioid epidemic. So our mission today isn't just to uncover what J&J was hiding, but really how they hid it. And maybe why their reputation, their cherished reputation, remained for so many people pretty much untouchable.
Yeah.
Even after, pleading guilty to multiple crimes.
It's a fascinating question. And, that's an absolutely essential starting point.
Yeah.
Because the real foundation of Johnson & Johnson's power, it isn't just their market share, right, or their commercial reach.
No. What is it then?
It's emotional.
Yeah.
It's what they internally actually refer to as the golden egg.
The golden egg. Okay.
Yeah. And this concept, it's not subtle. It was explicitly detailed in their corporate strategy slide decks. We've seen them dating back to 1999, 2008.
Right.
They understood that, companies like Colgate or maybe Merck, they had what J&J called rational trust. It's built purely on product performance.
Does the toothpaste work?
Exactly. If it works, you trust the brand. Simple. J&J, though, they believe they possess something different. Real emotional trust.
Okay, emotional trust. How did they build that? Because that does feel unique.
Well, largely through their baby products. Think about it. The sensory imprint of Johnson's baby powder or the shampoo.
Oh, yeah, the smell.
Right, through fragrance, through touch, through just being constantly present in the most, intimate moments of family life. They managed to implant this association. Love, happiness, trust, intimacy. They linked all that to their brand. Basically from infancy onward.
So it's not just branding, it's deeper.
It's much deeper. It's a foundational emotional connection.
So this golden egg, this emotional trust, it's not just like a sales booster, it's more like a strategic shield.
That's exactly it. It's defined in their own materials as a public relations contrivance of unrivaled power and perseverance. That's their words.
Wow. Unrivaled power.
So when the company faces, lawsuits or recalls or even criminal convictions, that inherent, almost generational goodwill, it acts as this nearly impenetrable barrier. It protects the brand from the kind of consequences that would just crush almost any other corporation. And over this deep dive, we're going to see how J&J repeatedly leveraged this goodwill across all its major businesses, really, from, deceptive marketing of prescription drugs like Risperdal and Procrit to hiding contamination within the very products that built that trust, like the baby powder.
A core product.
Yeah. And then the disastrous consequences of some of its medical devices. It's a pattern.
Okay, let's dig into that pattern then. Let's maybe start with a human story, one that kind of reveals the the rot, maybe, at the core of the pharmaceutical sales culture that J&J seems to have fostered.
Yeah, this was powerful.
So the catalyst, apparently, for years of investigative reporting into J&J's misconduct, it was this chance encounter. A reporter met a Janssen pharmaceutical sales rep. Janssen's the pharma arm of J&J, right?
Correct, yeah.
Met her at an airport bar.
Yeah, and the detail here, it's chilling because it shows this direct line from, like, a sales target straight to a ruined life.
Yeah.
So this rep, she was selling Risperdal. That's a powerful antipsychotic, right? Approved only for severe conditions like schizophrenia.
Right. Not for everyday issues.
Definitely not. But she shared this story about her sister's son, 10 years old. The boy had gotten into a fight on the playground. Nothing too serious, probably. But the school principal insisted he sees a psychiatrist.
Okay, so the rep steps in to help the family, right? Uses her connections.
Exactly. She expedites the boy's visit to one of her top prescribers. And she actually referred to this doctor as one of her whales.
Whales. Is that common industry talk?
Oh, yeah. It's the term for doctors whose, extremely high prescription numbers basically fund the reps' bonuses, their trips, the company gifts. She had actively cultivated this relationship, showered him with J&J-funded marketing talks, incentives, the whole deal.
So she sends her nephew to this whale doctor.
Right. And the 10-year-old arrives, apparently convinced he's perfectly normal, just had a fight, and the doctor immediately prescribes free samples of Risperdal.
Immediately. No hesitation.
Immediately. Now just think about that. The doctor, likely influenced by the rep, just dispenses this powerful, mind-altering antipsychotic. Samples which, by the way, the rep herself had probably delivered just days earlier.
And the consequences for the boy?
Devastatingly rapid. He immediately gained 25 pounds, became deeply embarrassed about his size, stopped doing things he loved, like swimming. And the family, well, it fractured under the stress.
Oh.
And the rep, watching her own nephew suffer. She apparently had this moment of clarity. She realized her high sales numbers, her big bonuses, were directly funding a system that was making her own family sick.
That's heavy.
She actually said that the money the psychiatrist was generating for her, it now made her physically ill. She recognized the moral injury. Hitting those sales targets came at a terrible cost.
And this personal story, it really just highlights the bigger commercial goal J&J had, doesn't it?
Absolutely. They knew the schizophrenia market was tiny, less than 1% of the adult U.S. population. That's not enough for blockbuster drug targets.
Right.
So a 1994 sales plan, it was explicit. They needed, and this is a quote, aggressive expansion of Risperdal use in other indications. They couldn't just rely on the FDA-approved uses.
Okay, so if they can't legally market it for unapproved uses, how do they manage to expand the market so aggressively? How do they not get shut down immediately?
Well, they created what was basically an ingenious but totally illegal internal strategy. They called it the sell to the symptoms strategy.
Sell to the symptoms.
Yeah. J&J executives fostered this culture where sales reps were told to pitch the drug not based on the approved diagnosis, psychosis or schizophrenia,
Right.
but based on generalized, really common symptoms. They even created this memorable acronym, DART, to help reps remember the illegal sales pitch.
DART, what's that stand for?
Depression, agitation, racing thoughts, and tension.
So common things lots of people experience.
Exactly. The rationale was incredibly cynical. They argued, well, since patients with schizophrenia suffer from almost every psychiatric symptom imaginable, theoretically, Risperdal could treat everything. And this allowed them to pivot towards these massive, lucrative populations where the drug was never approved and often actually actively dangerous.
And this sell to the symptoms strategy, it specifically led them to target two groups known to be really vulnerable, right?
Yes. The frail, elderly, and quite shockingly, children.
Okay, let's talk about the elderly first. People with dementia, Alzheimer's, they often experience agitation.
Right. So J&J launched a dedicated elder care sales force, a specialized unit. Started with 178 reps, quickly ballooned to 636, just focused on this market.
And this was happening even after the FDA had specifically rejected using Risperdal for those symptoms.
Yes. In 1999, the FDA explicitly rejected it. And the rejection wasn't arbitrary. It was based on concrete, really catastrophic evidence.
What did the evidence show?
Clinical trials showed Risperdal not only failed to provide significant cognitive or behavioral benefits for these elderly patients, but critically, it caused patients to die in significantly greater numbers than those on a placebo.
It was killing them more often.
Yes. The drug dramatically increased the risk of strokes and cardiovascular adverse events. CVD-AEs, they call them. J&J just ignored this. They kept pushing the drug, pitching it to nursing homes and caregivers as basically a chemical restraint.
To make patients easier to handle.
Exactly. More compliant, easier to manage, regardless of the lethal risk.
And at the same time, they were targeting children.
Simultaneously. They estimated the pediatric market was potentially worth $821 million annually, a huge number.
And the goal wasn't just treating, say, rare childhood psychosis.
Oh, no. The goal was basically to chemically tranquilize children who were displaying common conduct disorders, or even just symptoms that adults found inconvenient, like being stubborn or simply disobedient.
Using antipsychotic for disobedience.
That was the implication. And the drug's effectiveness in kids, it was measured by immediate reductions in exactly those behaviors.
How so?
Well, risperidol's immediate effects include things like profound sleepiness, nausea, general sedation, so it was easy to demonstrate short-term efficacy in making a child less troublesome.
Right. They seem calmer because they're sedated.
Precisely. But J&J systematically minimized the true long-term costs. We're talking reduced life expectancy, severe obesity, increased risk of diabetes, permanent motor disorders, serious life-altering consequences.
And then there was the side effect that was particularly devastating for young boys, gynecomastia.
Yes, the growth of female breasts. Risperidol was unique among the newer antipsychotics in its ability to raise prolactin levels. That's the hormone responsible for stimulating breast development.
And this wasn't just a rare freak occurrence.
Not at all. J&J's own clinical trial, RIS-INT41, proved the risk was massive. Even the interim results showed 3.4% of participants had already developed gynecomastia. That rate was 30 times higher than what was warned on the drug's label at that time.
30 times higher, and that was just the interim result.
Exactly. It only got worse. By the time the company finally completed the study, the rate of permanent breast development among boys who remained in the trial jumped to a staggering 13%.
13%, so roughly 1 in 8 boys.
Roughly 1 boy in every 8 who took the drug long-term suffered this permanent disfiguring side effect. That's a risk few parents, if any, would knowingly take, right?
Absolutely not. And J&J knew this.
They knew. And they actively suppressed the full results of that key trial.
We can see the human cost in stories like Austin Pledger's. You mentioned him earlier. He had autism, suffered from intense rages.
Right. And his pediatric neurologist assured his worried parents that risperidol would just, quote, take the edge off. They were concerned about weight gain. They asked about that, but they felt they could manage it. They never heard a single word about gynecomastia.
Not a word.
Not according to them. Years later, his mother, Benita, saw Austin trying to hide the excess fat on his chest. He was embarrassed because he thought he looked like his mother in her nightgown.
Oh, that's heartbreaking.
It wasn't until the litigation started that they realized the true cause. Austin developed size 46DD breasts, permanent. Benita later testified, really emphatically, that she was never informed of the risk of her son developing breasts. J&J concealed that key data point.
And the whistleblowers, the sales reps themselves, they confirmed this wasn't just accidental, not just a few bad apples.
No, they described it as a pervasive internal culture of ickiness. That's a quote from one former employee. Sales reps like Vicky Starr and Anisha Thedford, they testified that managers systematically instructed them to falsely record their sales calls.
How? What did they have to falsify?
In the internal computerized descriptions of their calls, they were explicitly told to list the target diagnosis as schizophrenia.
Even when it wasn't.
Even when they were spending the entire pitch detailing uses for dementia in the elderly or aggressive behavior in children, it was a deliberate effort to create a false paper trail.
To insulate the company legally.
Exactly. While the illegal sales machine just kept churning out profits.
And the deception went even deeper, didn't it? It actually infiltrated entire state health systems.
Yes, this is where it gets really systemic. J&J successfully infiltrated and influenced state treatment protocols. A key example is the Texas Medication Algorithm Project, or TMAP.
TMAP, what was that?
It was a project supposedly designed to standardize mental health treatment in Texas. But J&J, along with other pharmaceutical companies, significantly underwrote the project financially.
They funded it. What was the result of that funding?
Well, the resulting treatment algorithm, surprise, surprise, essentially decreed that only expensive, newer antipsychotics like risperidol would be the first-line treatments for a whole variety of conditions.
What about older, cheaper drugs? Generics.
They were effectively made illegal within the state system, unless doctors went through extensive, burdensome written justifications. It actually became easier for a doctor to justify using the expensive patented drug than to use the older, often safer generic one.
Wait a minute, so they were basically bribing state officials to change policy, making cheaper alternatives harder to use, mandating their expensive product.
That's what the evidence strongly suggests, and the cash payouts weren't trivial, and they were intentionally obscured.
How much money are we talking?
Well, Dr. Stephen Schoen. He was TMP's lead author and the medical director of the Texas Mental Health Department. He received $25,000 directly from J&J.
$25,000? Did he disclose that?
No. He lied about it for years, even under oath in depositions. Finally admitted it was deposited directly into his personal bank account. Other state officials involved in crafting that algorithm received sums as high as $314,000.
$300,000. Wow.
These payments effectively conquered Texas's mental health prescribing guidelines. It created this incredibly profitable model that J&J then actively sought to export to other states, knowing full well they were engaged in systemic fraud. So the Risperdal case really shows deception in their medicine division. But this next case study, it shows an alleged betrayal right at the core of their emotional brand foundation.
Johnson's baby powder, the actual golden egg.
Exactly. And the deception here, it hinges on a really simple geological fact.
Which is?
The main ingredient, talc and asbestos. They're often called mineral twins.
Mineral twins? Why?
Because they share the exact same chemical ingredients. Magnesium, silicon, oxygen. It just takes a different mix of temperature and pressure deep within the earth for one or the other to form.
Okay.
So when talc is mined commercially, especially from older open-pit mines, it's highly susceptible to being contaminated with microscopic crystalline needles of asbestos.
And asbestos is the substance proven to cause deadly diseases like mesothelioma.
Mesothelioma, ovarian cancer, yes. Proven carcinogen.
And J&J knew about this risk, this proximity.
Oh, they weren't just aware of the geology.
Yeah.
They had internal warnings about the resulting health risks decades ago. Decades. As early as 1969, internal J&J staff were expressing deep concern. They worried about potential litigation from pulmonary disease.
Lung disease.
Yes, that might be, and again, this is their wording, rightfully or wrongfully attributed to inhalation of our powder formulations.
So 1969, that's 2 years before the big external studies started hitting. They were already worried about lung issues from the powder.
Correct. And then the wider scientific community started finding evidence that the risk was much broader than just lungs.
Right. 1971, the Tenovis Cancer Research Institute in Wales. They were looking for asbestos in ovarian and cervical tumors.
But instead, they found pure talc particles.
Yeah.
Right at the very core of the tumors they examined.
Talc, not asbestos. Interesting.
But later that same year, Dr. Arthur Langer, a really prominent mineralogist, world expert on asbestos, he tested samples of Johnson's baby powder.
What did he find?
He found both talc and trace amounts of chrysotile asbestos contamination in the samples he tested.
Asbestos in the powder.
Yes, and this was unsolicited research, right?
Yeah.
J&J hadn't asked him to look. Their immediate reaction wasn't, curiosity or concern.
It's damage control.
Total damage control. J&J managers seriously discouraged Langer from publishing his findings. They tried to bury the information before it ever became public.
So, despite this mounting internal knowledge, this external scientific evidence, J&J maintained for decades publicly that their baby powder was completely asbestos-free. What do the internal documents show about that claim?
The internal communications are pretty damning. They demonstrate clear knowledge of contamination. For example, there's a record of J&J sending the FDA a lab report from a Chicago facility. That report did find tremolite, which is a known form of asbestos in their talc.
Okay, so they found it. Did they tell the FDA?
Well, in the final official report J&J submitted to the FDA, that critical finding was just eliminated from the line item. Gone.
They removed it.
They removed it. And handwritten on the original source document, the one with the finding, was the stark instruction: do not use this report.
Wow, do not use this report. That's pretty blatant. Concealing evidence of a known carcinogen in a product used on babies, used by women daily.
And the extent of this cover-up, it was eventually confirmed in open court. Much later, during litigation, John Hopkins, he was a former J&J talc executive, had been the company's designated representative in earlier lawsuits.
Right.
He had to testify. And he acknowledged that previous statements made under oath by another top executive statements claiming asbestos was never found in baby powder were false.
He admitted the previous exec lied under oath.
When pressed, he confirmed that the previous testimony was, in fact, perjury.
Perjury. That's huge. And the human cost of this alleged deception, it's impossible to ignore, right? especially regarding ovarian cancer.
It is. The World Health Organization's Cancer Research Agency, IARC, they've long concluded that women who regularly use talc in the perineal area, dusting the vaginal area, often for freshness, had a 30% to 60% greater risk of developing ovarian cancer compared to women who didn't use it.
30 to 60% higher risk.
Yeah. One prominent epidemiologist estimated that because of J&J's baby powder, the product contributes to roughly 2,500 ovarian cancer diagnoses in the U.S. every year and about 1,500 deaths annually.
2,500 diagnoses, 1,500 deaths every year. That's staggering. Can we put a face to that statistic?
We can. Think about Tony Roberts. She was a lifelong user of the product, applied it twice daily, not just, down there, but under her breast line, on her inner thighs.
Like many women did.
Exactly. And like many mothers, she even sprinkled it on her hockey-playing son's smelly equipment. It just shows how completely the product was integrated into her daily life, her family's life.
And she got cancer.
She was diagnosed with cancer that had spread widely. She needed a massive 9-hour hysterectomy, followed by years of really debilitating chemotherapy. She testified about the personal toll, saying her youngest son was never the same after that, just from the trauma of watching her suffer.
And J&J's defense in these lawsuits, it's kind of remarkable, isn't it? It consistently falls back on the very reputation, the very trust that the company was apparently undermining internally.
Precisely. The legal strategy is brilliantly cynical, you could say.
Yeah.
Defense lawyers invariably portray the company not as, a corporation facing mounting evidence of negligence, but as a beacon of ethics. They leverage that golden egg, that emotional trust, to sway juries. And crucially, in many places, plaintiffs' attorneys are actually prohibited from introducing evidence of the company's other issues.
Like the Risperdal convictions, the opioid stuff.
Exactly. All that is inadmissible. So juries are forced to decide the talc case in isolation, in this vacuum where J&J's spotless public image still kind of dominates the narrative.
But even with that strategic shield, they don't always win. Sometimes they lose, and lose big.
They do. In the case involving Tony Roberts, that jury, they saw through the defense. They delivered a massive $4.14 billion punitive damages verdict.
$4.14 billion.
Billion, with a B reached by an 11-1 vote. And the jury specifically stated that the severity of the punishment was because J&J used its unparalleled trusted status, built around concepts like our children, to allow this proven danger to persist, just for profit.
So the jury felt J&J betrayed that trust.
That's exactly what the verdict signaled. They betrayed the very foundation of their brand.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. If you ask anyone, like any business school student, about ethical crisis management, the first example they'll probably bring up is the Tylenol poisonings. 1982, Chicago.
Oh yeah, the classic case study.
Right. 7 people died. Mary Kellerman, Adam Janus. Terrible tragedy. Someone tampered with capsules, put cyanide in them, and the legend is powerful, right? J&J's response is immediate, massive, nationwide recall, inventing tamper-resistant packaging, being open with the public. It's celebrated as the gold standard, the most ethical, effective crisis reaction in corporate history.
That's basically the origin story for that golden egg narrative we talked about.
Yeah.
How they supposedly earned that trust.
But like most corporate legends, the full truth might be a bit less inspiring.
Well, yeah. While their ultimate response did manage to salvage the brand, internal documents actually show J&J strongly resisted a nationwide recall.
Right.
At least for several days.
Really? They resisted? Why?
Initially, they only agreed to a limited recall. Just the contaminated lots. It seems it was about cost and reputation management, the very things their credo supposedly protected them from prioritizing over public health.
So they held back at first.
Yes. And this limited recall continued even after they learned about a copycat poisoning incident out in California, Oroville. Someone put strychnine in capsules there.
A copycat proved it wasn't contained to Chicago.
Exactly. It proved the problem wasn't isolated. Yet the full, massive, reputation-saving nationwide recall, that only came later, apparently after significant political and public pressure mounted.
Interesting. So the legend isn't quite the full picture, but that 1982 crisis, however handled, seems almost quaint compared to some later, more systematic contamination issues that J&J allegedly actively concealed. Let's jump forward to, 2009, 2010.
Right. This is where we see the cynicism perhaps really become institutionalized. Executives knew, they absolutely knew, that J&J manufacturing plants, one in Pennsylvania, one in Puerto Rico, were churning out contaminated products. Tylenol, Motrin, Zyrtec.
Contaminated with what?
It varied. Mold, bacteria, also a chemical called TBA2-4-6-tribromonoacyl. It caused this sickening odor, and there were reports of nausea, stomach pain, vomiting from people who took the products. And some of these were specifically children's formulations.
Children's Tylenol and Rotrin contaminated.
Yes. And legally, the FDA required a public mandatory recall. We're talking over 100 million bottles potentially affected.
Okay, so what did J&J do? Issue the recall?
No. Instead of transparency, they engaged in what federal officials later called a ghost recall.
A ghost recall? What on earth is that? How do you secretly pull 100 million bottles off shelves without anyone knowing?
It was a really detailed, deliberate deception. J&J hired private investigators and consulting firms. These firms then hired hundreds of secret shoppers.
Secret shoppers, like the ones who rate customer service?
Kind of, but with a much shadier mission. They were sent out to comb retail stores across the country, Walgreens, CVS, local pharmacies, everywhere. Their job was to buy up all the tainted bottles off the shelves.
Just buy them like regular customers.
Exactly. They were instructed to act like regular customers, often buying other items too, just to mask their true mission. It was a systematic, calculated effort to basically eliminate the evidence from the market.
And avoid the public disclosure, the bad press, the legal hit of a mandatory recall notice?
Precisely. The audacity is pretty shocking. They deliberately hid a significant public danger from the FDA, from the public, all while their manufacturing plants, which were later found to be unsanitary, violating numerous safety protocols, just kept churning out product.
What was the internal thinking? Why risk a ghost recall?
It seems pretty clear it was twofold. Protect the stock price and protect that golden egg reputation. A public recall of 100 million bottles, especially children's medicine, that would have been catastrophic for the brand.
Yeah, trust would plummet.
Absolutely. It would invite immediate, intense FDA scrutiny, massive financial penalties. By doing this clandestine buyback, they could try to handle the contamination quietly, like an inventory adjustment, avoid the massive public fear and the regulatory consequences.
And we should remember, right, the toxicity concerns around Tylenol's main ingredient, acetaminophen, they go way back, even before these contamination issues.
Oh yeah, deep-seated concerns. When extra-strength Tylenol was first approved for over-the-counter sales back in 1976, The Lancet, which is a top British medical journal.
Very respected.
Right, they published this damning editorial. It basically said that if acetaminophen were discovered today, it would not be approved for OTC sale because of its known toxic effects on the liver.
Wow. So a major journal thought it was too dangerous even back then.
That's what they argued. The Lancet noted that taking just a little more than the recommended maximum daily dose could cause significant liver damage. And acetaminophen poisoning was already one of the commonest causes of liver failure in Britain at the time.
And did the U.S. react to that?
Well, the resulting surge in liver-related deaths and injuries here in the U.S. after the OTC launch, it was largely ignored by the FDA. They spent literally a decade just debating whether to put a strong warning label on it. A decade. J&J, meanwhile, capitalized on this regulatory slowness. They advertised Tylenol relentlessly as the most potent pain reliever you can buy without a prescription. Sales skyrocketed.
So there's this paradox. J&J offering contaminated medicine on one hand and a structurally potentially toxic pain reliever on the other. And this complexity deepens even more when we look at their role in the opioid crisis.
Yeah, their involvement there was absolutely central. Many people don't realize this, but J&J actually manufactured the active pharmaceutical ingredients, the raw opioid materials, for roughly half of all U.S. opioid pills.
Half. So they weren't just selling their own branded opioids, they were supplying others.
Yes. They supplied companies like Purdue Pharma, the makers of OxyContin. They were, in a very real sense, the engine that fueled the epidemic right from the ground level, the raw material source.
And what about their own opioid products?
Their big one was fentanyl. J&J aggressively marketed its fentanyl patch, Duragesic. Now, it was originally approved for cancer patients with severe pain, people who had trouble swallowing pills.
Right. Very specific, serious cases.
Very specific. But the company immediately pushed it for off-label uses not sanctioned by the FDA. Things like moderate to severe chronic pain, such as back pain, much more common ailments affecting millions.
It's back pain. Fentanyl for back pain seems extreme.
It does now, but they worked hard to normalize it. And they falsely promoted Duragesic as being minimally addictive compared to traditional oral opioids.
Was that true?
No, it wasn't. Fentanyl is incredibly potent and addictive. They also used the sophisticated digital tracking system to focus their sales efforts. They targeted a very specific group, the roughly 1,000 doctors nationwide who prescribed the most opioids overall.
Hyper-targeting the biggest prescribers.
Exactly. They recognized that this tiny group of doctors accounted for something like 20% of the entire pain market dollars. So focus on them, maximize profit regardless of the rising addiction rates.
And it wasn't just sales reps pushing doctors, right? They tried to shape the whole public narrative.
Absolutely. J&J actively promoted the idea that millions of Americans were suffering from untreated pain. They framed it as a crisis of undertreatment rather than focusing on the growing addiction epidemic.
How did they do that?
They co-opted major professional medical societies and patient advocacy groups. For instance, the American Pain Society, which later became pretty infamous for its role in fueling the opioid epidemic. It was actually founded with a significant grant from J&J.
Wow.
This strategy was designed to convince doctors, regulators, and the public that using strong opioids, including their Duragesic patch, for common chronic pain was not only safe, but maybe even ethically necessary.
And this continued even after their patent on Duragesic expired. They went after the generic competition.
They did. When Mylan launched a generic version of the fentanyl patch, J&J launched this really vicious smear campaign against them.
Yeah.
They claimed the Mylan generic patch posed a, quote, threat to patient and public safety due to potential abuse.
That's pretty hypocritical, isn't it?
Extremely. Because this campaign was running at the same time that J&J's own reservoir patch, a different design, was being recalled for manufacturing defects that could cause the fentanyl to leak out, potentially causing overdoses. So yeah, pure hypocrisy aimed at protecting market share. Safety seemed secondary.
Okay, let's transition now from pain relief and opioids to medical devices. This is another huge part of J&J's business. Let's start with Procrit. That was their blockbuster drug for anemia.
Procrit, based on erythropoietin or EPO, it was an enormous success story for J&J financially. Became their most profitable drug, generated a $100 billion franchise by 1998.
$100 billion, huge. What was it used for mainly?
Primarily to treat anemia in kidney dialysis patients and in cancer patients who were undergoing chemotherapy. The idea was, boost red blood cell production to avoid needing blood transfusions.
Seems like a good idea. But the financial success, it hit a pretty horrific safety profile, especially in cancer patients.
It did. The devastating danger became crystal clear during something called the normal hematocrit trial. The independent data safety board monitoring that trial. They were forced to abruptly halt it, stop the study completely.
Why? What did they find?
They found that patients receiving higher doses of EPO, the active ingredient in Procrit, were dying in far greater numbers than patients on lower doses.
Dying more often with more drug.
Yes. The drug increased the risks of death, stroke, heart attacks, all while providing no discernible improvement to the patient's quality of life. They didn't feel any better, but they died sooner.
Okay, so J&J is confronted with undeniable evidence. Their top-selling drug is actively killing patients when given at the doses they were promoting. What was their response to this critical safety data?
Complete suppression. Instead of disclosing the results immediately, warning doctors, adjusting their marketing, they launched this massive feel-good advertising campaign called Strength for Living.
Strength for living, while the drug was potentially shortening lives.
Exactly. The financial motive was clearly paramount. And this led to widespread, quite sophisticated fraud, often executed with the complicity of the doctors themselves.
How did that fraud work? How did they get doctors involved?
It was incentivized through a specific billing mechanism. J&J and Amgen, who marketed a similar EPO drug, they encouraged what was called overfilling of the drug vials. They put extra drug in each vial.
Okay.
And they offered aggressive volume discounts to doctors, particularly oncologists. So oncologists would buy the drug wholesale, getting a big discount for buying in bulk. Then they'd bill Medicare or private insurance companies at the full list price, plus additional charges for that extra volume they got in the intentionally overfilled vials.
Ah, so they buy low, bill high, and bill for free extra drug.
Precisely. It created this massive, essentially risk-free profit margin for the doctors. This scheme was so lucrative, estimates suggest it might have doubled oncologists' take-home pay. We're talking boosting annual income from maybe $300,000 to over $600,000 just from the Procrit markup.
Wow, that's a huge incentive.
It cemented a strong financial preference among many oncologists for the drugs that provided the biggest markup. Regardless of the growing evidence that higher doses weren't just unhelpful, they actually increased tumor growth and the risk of death.
So the doctors were financially incentivized to prescribe higher doses of a drug that evidence showed could be killing their patients faster.
The evidence strongly suggests that for many, yes, the financial incentive overrode the ethical medical concern. Later studies eventually showed that cancer patients getting EPO were about 38% more likely to see their tumors grow faster.
38% faster tumor growth.
Yes. And despite 8 large-scale studies convincingly demonstrating these risks by late 2007, J&J officials continued to publicly deny the danger. In one hearing, they actually claimed the only side effects significantly different from placebo were diarrhea and edema, a massive calculated understatement of the risk of death.
It's just this pattern of prioritizing profit over patient safety, it seems to repeat almost identically in their medical device division. Let's talk about the Pinnacle metal-on-metal hip implants.
Right. Another huge J&J product line through their DePuy Synthes subsidiary. And here, J&J faced this critical turning point. Their own engineers discovered during internal pre-market tests.
Before it even went into patients.
Yes. They found that the metal-on-metal Pinnacle implant was failing spectacularly in the simulator. It was grinding itself apart, basically, just like earlier metal-on-metal hip designs from other companies that had already crippled tens of thousands of patients globally.
So they knew it had the same fundamental flaw. What was the dilemma they faced?
It was tied directly to the bottom line. If they admitted the flaw, admitted the device was grinding metal debris, they would miss the crucial FDA submission deadline.
And missing the deadline meant?
It meant they'd likely have to do expensive human clinical testing, cost millions in lost profits, huge delays in getting to market.
So what did they choose?
J&J executives made the conscious decision to push ahead with the application anyway, based on what turned out to be false specifications. Internal documents suggest they knew the device was flawed and that it would likely, quote, wound, cripple, and in some cases, kill tens of thousands. Yet they filed the application, prioritized market entry over safety.
And the consequences for patients who got these implants.
Horrific. The metal-on-metal design meant the cobalt chromium ball and socket literally ground against each other, shedding millions of microscopic metal shavings directly into the patient's bloodstream and the surrounding tissue.
Metal shavings in the body, what does that do?
It leads to a condition called metallosis, basically, metal poisoning. It caused severe systemic symptoms, damage to the heart, the brain, the eyes. Patients suffer from crippling fatigue, cognitive impairment, brain fog.
And locally around the hip.
Terrible tissue damage, including these huge, painful, pus-filled internal boils called pseudotumors. Often the only solution was more surgery complex, painful revision surgery to remove the faulty implant, which itself was often incomplete or caused more damage.
And to ensure this flawed device was a commercial success, J&J also allegedly initiated illegal payoffs to key surgeons, disguised as research.
Yes, these things called seeding trials. The Pinnacle one was known as the PINS study, and documents show it was explicitly conceived by the marketing department, not by science or any real clinical need.
So its purpose wasn't research.
Its primary function appears to have been to funnel money to high-volume orthopedic surgeons, essentially buying their loyalty, ensuring they use the Pinnacle implant. Internal J&J documents actually projected a 12-fold return on investment for the cost of this study, pure sales scheme masquerading as research.
12 times return. How much money went to surgeons?
9 key surgeons were paid millions of dollars in royalties, even though they weren't actually listed on the patent for the device. The brazenness was astonishing. One surgeon even admitted in testimony that he kept submitting follow-up data to J&J after his own hospital's ethics board, the Institutional Review Board, had explicitly ordered him to stop all activity associated with the study.
He ignored his hospital's ethics board because J&J was paying him.
It certainly looks that way. A complete disregard for ethical and institutional oversight when J&J money was involved.
This pattern of disregarding safety regulations, it seems to reach its peak with the ProLift vaginal mesh disaster. Is it true J&J sold this device without even asking the FDA for approval first?
That is correct. They sold the ProLift vaginal mesh, a Class II medical device, without submitting any pre-market notification to the FDA, which is described as a highly unusual step.
Highly unusual. Why would they do that?
It suggests incredible confidence, or perhaps arrogance, that they could just overwhelm any later regulatory response through sheer market presence and doctor adoption. Get it out there first, deal with regulators later.
And what happened when surgeons started using it?
Surgeons almost immediately began reporting serious, devastating complications. The mesh, which was used to repair pelvic organ prolapse, often in younger women after childbirth, it began eroding, literally cutting through the vaginal walls.
Cutting through? That sounds horrific.
It caused severe chronic pain, constant bleeding, infections, and incredibly painful sex, a condition called dyspareunia. Many women were left permanently injured, unable to have intercourse ever again.
Did J&J know this was happening?
Yes. Internal emails from as early as 2005 raised serious issues about the risk of permanent sexual dysfunction from the mesh. Yet an executive responded that any new truthful warnings about this risk would have to wait for future product revisions, which didn't happen for years.
Delay the warnings to protect sales.
It appears so. They completely prioritized market dominance. Get this. They spent $7.7 million on marketing the ProLift mesh versus a mere $600,000 on clinical testing and safety studies.
12 times more on marketing than on clinical.
A 12-fold imbalance.
Yeah.
They cemented this dangerous product in the market until lawsuits mounted, and they were finally forced to stop selling it in 2012.
Okay, so we've seen the succession of, well, systemic fraud, hidden risks, deliberate deception across pharmaceuticals, consumer goods like baby powder, medical devices. It just raises this huge question, how? How did Johnson & Johnson manage to get away with this kind of repeated, widespread behavior for so long? Yes, there were fines, sometimes big ones, but the company just endured, kept its reputation largely intact.
Yeah, that's the core question, isn't it?
And the root cause seems to point towards the relationship between J&J and the very agency that's supposed to protect the public from this stuff, the FDA.
Right. The relationship between J&J and the FDA. It's been justly described by some investigators as maybe the most effective smokescreen in capitalism.
The most effective smokescreen. Wow, how does that work?
Well, the problem is structural, really. For decades, Congress has chronically underfunded the FDA. This has forced the agency to become more and more reliant on industry user fees.
So the companies the FDA regulates are actually paying the FDA's bills?
To a significant extent, yes. It's this bizarre arrangement where the regulated industry essentially funds the regulator. This creates an inherent financial vulnerability. Combine that with certain legislative loopholes, particularly around medical devices, and you end up with what experts call a captive regulator.
A captive regulator, meaning it's captured by the industry it's supposed to oversee.
Essentially, yes. And we have to be clear here. The source material we reviewed indicates the FDA arguably ignored, enabled, or encouraged almost every single J&J disaster we've talked about today.
Ignored, enabled, or encouraged. That's a strong statement.
It is, but look at the record. They were legally powerless to intervene on cosmetics like baby powder because of regulatory gaps Congress never fixed.
Yeah.
And critically, they were apparently so dependent on J&J's financial support through those user fees that they didn't impose really significant penalties on the company, even while they were actively investigating J&J for those illegal ghost recalls of contaminated Tylenol and Motrin.
So, J&J is breaking the law with the ghost recall. The FDA knows it. But because J&J pays fees, the FDA goes easy on them.
That's the implication of the dynamic. This dependency seems to create this remarkable level of deference towards the corporation.
Yeah.
There's a specific example involving the CEO.
Alex Gorsky, what happened?
Right. So in 2012, J&J had just successfully, you could say, leveraged the FDA's financial vulnerability and structural weaknesses. They managed to avoid huge mandatory recalls and fines on two disastrous devices we just discussed, the vaginal mesh and the metal-on-metal hip implants.
Okay.
Fresh off these regulatory wins, J&J CEO Alex Gorsky immediately requested meetings, not with mid-level staff, but with the FDA's top 4 officials, including the commissioner herself, Margaret Hamburg.
Why the immediate meeting request right after dodging those bullets?
According to the records, the stated purpose was to continue to build a good relationship. Just think about that power dynamic for a second. J&J had effectively just saved the agency potential hassle, money, political heat by delaying or avoiding massive bans and recalls. They can now just walk in and essentially secure a highly favorable relationship with the top regulator. Virtually ensuring softer enforcement, preferential treatment going forward, the regulated entity was basically dictating the terms of its own oversight.
That is a devastating indictment, especially because most people, the public, we still largely view the FDA as this tough, independent watchdog, the cop on the beat.
Right. It's the mythology of vigilance. And J&J lawyers actively exploit this myth in court all the time.
Ow.
Defense attorneys will stand up and brush off accusations of, say, illegal off-label marketing by arguing something like, well, the evidence will prove otherwise, ladies and gentlemen. Because if that behavior were truly illegal, the FDA would have stopped them years ago.
They use the FDA's inaction as proof of their innocence.
Exactly. The myth of regulatory vigilance becomes J&J's best legal defense. And it gets worse. This myth also secures the willing participation of thousands of co-conspirators.
Co-conspirators? Like who?
Primarily doctors and sales representatives. They convince themselves, or are convinced, that the obviously illegal sales aids they're using, the off-label pitches they're making,
Right.
they must be legally acceptable. Why? Because surely the vigilant FDA would have shut down J&J's entire operation if the conduct were truly fraudulent.
So it creates a kind of moral immunity by proxy. If the FDA allows it, it must be okay.
Precisely. It fosters this culture where people can ignore their own ethical alarms because they assume the regulator's doing its job.
And what does this culture of just, compliance look like at the very top, at the executive level? Does it involve real ethical considerations, or is it just about avoiding getting caught?
Well, the culture might be best summed up by a deposition given by a high-ranking J&J executive, a guy named Pandina. A plaintiff's attorney asked him this simple, almost philosophical question. Should drug companies be honest with the public?
Okay. Seems like a straightforward question. What did he say?
Pandina's response was incredibly illuminating and, frankly, devastating. He stated that, quote, honesty is a very broad term.
Honesty is a very broad term.
That's what he said. And he went on to say that companies should merely, quote, abide by the regulations and rules.
Wow. So the standard isn't actually being honest. The standard is just following the rules, checking the boxes.
Exactly. It defines ethical conduct not as, a moral imperative or transparency, but merely as meeting the minimum regulatory requirement needed to stay operational.
And when that regulatory requirement is weak because the regulator is maybe captured or underfunded?
Then the company feels justified, perhaps, in pushing right up to, and often, as we've seen, continually past the actual line of the law, because the consequences just aren't severe enough to deter them.
It's just the duality of Johnson & Johnson is inescapable, isn't it? And that's why this story is so complicated, so hard to grapple with. We've spent this whole deep dive detailing decades of, criminal fraud, deception, alleged negligence, stuff that led to massive fines, immense human suffering.
Yeah, pretty bleak picture.
But the sources, to be fair, they also highlight the positive side. J&J has simultaneously brought genuinely life-saving, life-improving products to market. Things like Stelara for Crohn's disease, disposable contact lenses, which were revolutionary, or Demoda for prostate cancer, even bedaquiline for drug-resistant tuberculosis. Real innovations.
Absolutely. And that duality, that's the very definition of the problem, in a way. It allows the company to operate under the shadow of its successes, using the good to mask the rot beneath.
Right.
The core issue, as the analysis suggests, is that bad behavior without severe, meaningful consequence is just deeply corrupting. J&J seems to have developed this kind of unique immunity.
Unique immunity.
Yeah, an ability to engage in criminal conduct, cause harm, even death, and yet still somehow be showered with public admiration and trust. Because that golden egg of emotional connection we talked about at the start, it's just incredibly difficult to crack.
So the trust overrides the facts for many people.
It often seems to. And the transformation that some sources trace J&J moving, in their view, from ethical to evil in its core business practices, they argue it mirrors this larger, slow-motion metamorphosis of American healthcare from best to worst.
How so?
We've arguably created a system where the profit motive is structurally incentivized to override ethical codes like J&J's own credo, where the financial benefits of concealing negative data often outweigh the regulatory cost of disclosure, and where even massive financial penalties are simply factored in by companies as, the cost of doing business. Not a deterrent, just an expense line.
Which brings us, I think, to our final provocative thought. Something for you listening to really consider. When a company like Johnson & Johnson is so deeply financially interwoven with its regulators, when its money helps fund the very patient advocacy groups that should be holding it accountable, when its devices and drugs are used by thousands of doctors who might financially benefit from using them through rebates or markups, what fundamental structural change in our whole U.S. for-profit healthcare model would actually be necessary to truly hold a company like that accountable?
It's a huge question.
It is. When trust is intentionally engineered, weaponized almost, to override safety concerns, how can that trust ever be genuinely restored?
And the question really isn't just about J&J, is it? It's about the systemic flaws, the loopholes, the misaligned incentives that allowed them to become this quintessentially American company.
Yeah.
A company that mastered not only medicine and money, but also, it seems, the manipulation of public emotion and governmental oversight.
Yeah. Heavy stuff to think about. Look, if you found these details surprising, maybe disturbing, if this deep dive gave you some valuable insight into the reality behind that trusted corporate reputation, remember, this is exactly the kind of knowledge, the kind of deeper understanding we aim to surface for you every time.
That's it all.
So please, do us that favor and ensure you hit that like button right now. Leave a comment. Tell us which case study really stood out to you. Was it the TMA bribery in Texas, making cheaper drugs harder to get? Was it that unbelievable ghost recall of contaminated children's medicine? Let us know.
Yeah, please do.
And definitely subscribe so you don't miss our next deep dive. We really appreciate you trusting us with your curiosity. Thanks for joining.